Throughout the 19th century, the United States exploited Mexico for economic and political gains. The U.S. acquisition of Mexico in the early 1800s had great profit motive that was moved by corporate interest. Manifest destiny is the idea that justified U.S. expansion. It is an important idea that helps historians understand the U.S.-Mexico War. When the United States won the war in 1848, they acquired land in California. California had ports accessible for international trade and was central to the gold rush, making the land profitable and of interest to U.S. investors and politicians. This set the stage of U.S. economic exploitation of Mexico that would proceed through the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. A specific example of industrialization in Mexico led by U.S. investors was the development of railroads in the mid-19th century. In 1868, a man named William Rosecrans entered the scene of U.S.-Mexico relations as the United States Minister to Mexico. Rosecrans was an influential figure during the 19th century. He was a Civil War Union general, a politician, and a coal oil company executive. He had a relationship with the Pennsylvania Railway Company, a prominent leader in railroad expansion throughout the United States. Rosecrans's role as minister, alongside his relationship with the Pennsylvania Railway Company, makes him an example of how U.S. investors and politicians use their power to advance personal agendas. Rosecrans wanted to both expand the railway system throughout Mexico and create a national bank. Rosecrans was phenomenal at appealing to both the U.S. and Mexican governments. Many U.S. investors supported his plans because an increase of capital in Mexico would make them money. Historian John Hart argues that American investors' control of the national bank would enable them to influence state policy decisions. When his term as minister to Mexico ended, Rosecrans published a letter to the people of the United States in 1870 that described the relationship between the United States and Mexico. In this document, he promoted a perspective that businessmen and capitalists require, and the interest of our country demands, that our government should declare policy towards Mexico in accordance with our interests, our convictions, and the spirit of the age. This mindset is similar to the one adopted by the United States during the U.S.-Mexico War. Rosecrans supported American bondholders and investors by increasing their political influence in the U.S. and Mexican governments. The expansion of the railway system provided yet another source of infrastructure to improve trade and maximize monetary gain for U.S. investors. Rosecrans's popularity was not limited to the United States. His diplomatic relationship with the Mexican government helped push his U.S. agenda. Rosecrans did not favor territorial gains at Mexico's expense. He also proposed that Mexico pay back debts through land and railroad grants, rather than in cash payments. This was appealing to the struggling Mexican government. In a letter written to President Juarez in May 1869, Rosecrans wrote that all the great commercial interests in the United States and the world favor it. These interests are naturally constructive, not destructive. They must wish for whatever will promote the prosperity, wealth, and progress of Mexico. The Mexican government seemingly accepted these ideas, saying that they were animated by the desire to secure industrial immigration and were in favor of the development of commerce and railway industries between the United States and Mexico. Even though the Mexican government appeared to support his ideas, it is important to be critical of the source, since this is a letter that Rosecrans decided to publish himself. There were likely other attitudes within the Mexican government towards the development of railways that opposed his ideas. Even though Rosecrans had support in both the United States and Mexico, his agenda ultimately failed due to businessmen and politicians who had interest in rival projects. He was only minister to Mexico for a year. Still, railroad development through the 19th century was inevitable, just not in the capacity Rosecrans had hoped. These railroads constructed immigration patterns and created a mass labor migration that ultimately left thousands of Mexicans unemployed. Mexico became a cheap source of labor to the United States because railroads increased mobility between the two countries, making it easier for the United States to recruit labor and for workers to migrate across borders. Immigration from Mexico to the U.S. was spearheaded by railroad accessibility, and railroads today are significant to migration patterns and transportation to the United States.